for us to reflect on how truth has prospered among us over the last 12 months. This year, the State of the Society address has been prepared by and will be delivered by Aletia Dundas, member of New South Wales Regional Meeting. Aletia's engagement and involvement with the work of the Society has not only been restricted to New South Wales Regional Meeting and Quakers Australia, but has extended beyond that to QNO, with which she is involved. That's Quaker United Nations organization. And some time ago, Aletia had an opportunity to spend time in the Middle East, observing some of the challenges between Palestine and Israel in an extraordinary role. She brings wonderful spiritual presence to all her work. Aletia, thank you for undertaking this task of reflecting back to us some of the things that have caught your attention this year as you've reflected on how truth has prospered among us. We'll hold you in silence. Speak when you feel led to start, friend.
I saw also that there was an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love, which flowed over the ocean of darkness. George Fox. Friends, we've been through some tough times these past years, both individually and collectively. Each person hearing or reading this address will have had their own experience of the COVID pandemic and the ways that family and friends have been separated or forced to live and work together in extremely close quarters. There has been the pain of lost connections and loneliness alongside the yearning for just a bit of space and solitude. The busyness of having too much to do balanced against the challenges for some of losing work and feeling idle. And Quaker meetings and committees, both local and national, have had similar experiences. They have been challenged to reimagine what it means to live out our testimony to community in these times of isolation, virtual gatherings, and the ever-present reminder to keep a safe social distance. In order to prepare for this State of the Society address, I did as those have done before me and read through the regional meetings reports and documents in advance for this yearly meeting. I also put out a survey where individual friends had the opportunity to share their experiences of how our society has prospered. And I listened to what was sometimes being said beneath the words. In discerning an answer to the question, what is the state of the Religious Society of Friends in Australia today? I have come to the feeling that we are in a tough place. For many, it's not overstating it to say that there is an ocean of darkness. But as philosopher Benjamin Blood said in 1860, there is a crack in everything that God has made, but through that crevice enters the light of heaven. Every report, and in the essence of what individual friends have shared, COVID and its impacts has been front of mind this year. While different regional meetings have experienced COVID very differently, many voices expressed a yearning to gather in person again, and almost a sense that until we meet again in person, it doesn't really count. Some people can't easily access online meetings, and for others, the experience is deeply unsatisfying. Children and junior young friends have been particularly affected by the lack of face-to-face gatherings. The biggest challenge for the children and GIF coordinators has been figuring out how to support young people, families, and meetings in the absence of yearly meeting gatherings and camps, which are usually the glue that holds them together. At the time of reporting, South Australia and Northern Territory Regional Meeting had just opened up its borders, while Tasmania Regional Meeting hadn't yet. Canberra and region Quakers were still dealing with the compounding impacts of the bushfires in 2019, as well as more recent lockdowns. Most regional meetings were using a mix of online and in-person gatherings. On the one hand, online meetings have increased accessibility for many, with West Australia Regional Meeting investing in technology in order to attract and nourish those living remotely. And Santrum also noticed that the online option increases accessibility. New South Wales Regional Meeting and Victoria Regional Meeting are now used to hybrid or fully online meetings for worship for business. While Queensland Regional Meeting has been less affected by lockdowns, online and hybrid gatherings have been explored as a way to connect with remote and isolated friends. I see all of these experiences as indicative of our collective desire to be inclusive, to be in community with one another, and to take up opportunities presented by a crisis. As Arundhati Roy has said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. Indeed, one unintended advantage of the situation we find ourselves in has been the establishment and continuation of online meetings for worship that span the usual geographic divide. Although the online recognised meeting, which gathers on Sundays at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, had begun before the pandemic hit, it has since become a recognised meeting under the care of New South Wales and has 20 to 25 attenders each week who join from several states of Australia and from overseas. The Rainbow Friends and Allies online group meets on the fourth Sunday of each month and has a roster of elders as well as social time at the end of worship. The under 50s-ish group began meeting fortnightly right after its yearly meeting 2021 birth, and now sees half a dozen friends meet together on the second Sunday of the month. These groups have offered fellowship for isolated friends or those who are not easily able to access Sunday morning worship. Many friends are concerned about the numbers, that our numbers of members and attenders are gradually declining, that there are fewer people to take on committee responsibilities, and that we are an ageing population. The 2016 census data indicates that more than 70% of those who identified as Quaker were over the age of 50, twice as many as the rest of the population. This means that children, GIFs, young friends, and all the adults up to the age of 50 make up only 30% of our society. By looking at the statement of membership for the past 3 years, graciously provided by our ever-patient secretary, I can see that numbers of members, attenders, and children of the meeting have all steadily declined. In 2021, we had 102 children compared with 134 in 2019. We have 1,432 adult members and attenders compared with 1,540 in 2019. So percentage-wise, we have about 3/4 of the children we had 2 years ago and 90% of the adults. So our numbers of children are declining more significantly than our adults. While some committees and regional meetings are also complaining that they're aging or struggling to find people to fulfill roles, individual friends are echoing these sentiments, speaking of feeling anxious about declining numbers, our shrinking community, our endless busyness, and the unrealistic expectations we place on volunteers. In keeping with this theme, we hear that the Secretary's workload has changed dramatically in recent years, expanding both in terms of expectations and responsibilities. It was felt that a more thorough review was needed, and a working party has been appointed to consider how the work of the Secretary might be reconfigured in future, which is another opportunity to imagine our world anew. Despite the overall picture being grim, there are flickers of hope. Canberra and region Quakers report that Goulburn meeting has a strong group of young people, and Queensland Regional Meeting reports several new attenders under the age of 30. Tasmania Regional Meeting want to release the joy of being Quakers and free it up from the business of running Quakers. Victoria Regional Meeting has found the paper Some Thoughts on the Right Ordering of Carts and Horses by Chris Warner helpful, which points to the demands on Friends' time and energy for inward-facing roles, amongst other concerns. Looking at the other types of numbers, the yearly meeting finances remain stable. Cash flow is lower, partly due to the COVID government payments ending, but we also have had lower costs due to meetings being held online. Some meetings are seriously considering financial viability or the future of meeting houses. Yet some regional meetings and committees report that finances are in surprisingly good shape. Victoria Regional Meeting had an unexpected surplus, and the Thanksgiving Fund and the new Yandavut Peace Fund both benefited from significant bequests. To me, these new funds provide opportunities for groups of friends and individual friends to pursue leadings and passions, to perhaps reimagine ways of working or living out our beliefs that were previously not possible. For me, more than the dwindling numbers of people in attendance, I'm concerned about how people are feeling about our society. For some, there's very little to be excited about. When I asked in my survey what's working well for you at the moment about Quakers in Australia, several people said not much. There's a lack of connection. We're not listening to our core testimonies, and some referenced the lack of diversity in our gatherings as a particular concern. There's a sense of despair, of feeling directionless, not dealing well with conflict, and not knowing one another anymore in the things that are eternal. Are we, as one friend put it, more focused on the letter than the spirit? In some ways, it was hard to discern how the spirit is moving amongst us. Regional meetings report that they are continuing to explore their spiritual life through various online and in-person processes. New South Wales Regional Meeting has been working through A Voice in the Wilderness, listening to the statement from the heart. Tasmania Regional Meeting asked friends to consider, how am I travelling in the spirit? Victoria Regional Meeting has supported a light group exploring silence, discomfort, and spirit. Many from the Climate Emergency and Species Extinction Working Group and a few other friends took part in an online Woodbrook course entitled Responding to Ecological Crisis, Quaker Spiritual Insights. However, I can't help but wonder what has become of these processes and courses. Where is the evidence of the truth prospering amongst us as a result? In the responses of individual friends through my survey, I gleaned more perhaps of how our spiritual life has prospered or not. One friend shared that being a Quaker still feels a bit spiritually lonely. Another said that we seem forever stuck on the shores of the ocean of light and rarely take more than a few steps into it. In the right ordering of carts and horses, the concern is raised about us putting community before worship in the days of online meetings. One area of hope for me was the videos for Australian Quaker Voices prepared by Emily Chapman-Searle. They are really honest portrayals of our values, spiritual life, and action. In these short episodes, friends speak about how they experience meeting for worship, how they live out the testimonies, and what makes their hearts sing. For some, there are times when meeting for worship has felt ecstatic, in perhaps the way that early friends were seeking. The episode on gender and relationships talks about Quakers being a safe place to follow one's identity journey alongside a faith journey. The Rainbow Friends and Allies Share and Tell about spiritual and gender diversity, held on the 19th of June, enabled those present to hear from friends with a lived experience of being transgender or non-binary, and to consider the idea of Quakers in Australia deliberately stating an intent to welcome gender diverse seekers, as Britain Yearly Meeting has done and Aotearoa New Zealand Yearly Meeting is also considering. For me, this feels like our next big area of growth. I was recently interviewed by the creators of Peace, a group that shares many values with Quakers. When I was asked why Quakers are only just now coming to an awareness about gender identity concerns, I found myself talking about the theological concept of continuous revelations and the idea that laying down swords and giving up slaves were also challenging shifts that only happened very incrementally, and because one or two friends continued to advocate persistently for change. While we Quakers in Australia still have a distance to travel in terms of our inclusion of gender diversity, we also have something unique to offer the world. We are willing to challenge ourselves on our own prejudice, and we are not afraid to reach out to and hear from those on the margins. As always, friends have been active in the world this past year. Friends in New South Wales participated in the Raising Peace Festival. In Queensland, friends have been picketing the Land Forces Expo and sending paper cranes to Osaka meeting in Japan. A climate action vigil was held outside Josh Frydenberg's office in Victoria. As a collective, we are wanting to be more engaged with our Pacific neighbours through the Pacific Conference of Churches and the Pacific Church Partnership Advocacy Network. We play an active role in several peace and justice groups, and the Quaker Peace and Legislation Committee continues to produce informative policy briefs. Quaker Service Australia continues its support to partners internationally and with First Nations communities. One significant development this past year was the establishment of the Australia Yearly Meeting Climate Emergency and Species Extinction Working Group, whose name inspires a sense of the radical honesty that early friends were known for. Yet, despite the promising name, my sense is that the working group hasn't yet found its groove, having just begun a time of scoping and reflection. I wonder, like some who responded to my questionnaire, what is holding us back from our radical roots? One friend said, even environmental issues, which are so important, seem to get little active participation, except from the mainly older friends. Of course, as we learned earlier, 70% of us are older friends. The climate emergency is an area where we clearly feel Quakers can and must act, drawing on our radical roots. Yet we are not in unity on how to go about this. Indeed, I notice that we hold several tensions about this in parallel. We want to meet together face to face, and yet we want to reduce carbon emissions. Some of us want to influence policy change through advocacy. Others want to engage in radical non-violent direct action. And others want to reduce their individual carbon footprint. I'm reminded of a recurring debate amongst flatmates several years ago. We were a household made up of climate activists, community energy scientists, policy influencers, and hippies. Eventually, after many discussions about who was right or most righteous, we came to the conclusion that all these contributors make up the climate justice movement, and all are equally important to the cause. Thinking about the climate emergency, as well as several other matters or processes before yearly meeting, such as the review of QSA and Australia yearly meeting, the review of the Secretary's role, standing committees' concerns about online meetings, and other murmurings, I found myself wondering if there's a pattern emerging. I've had a sense when reading some of the documents that there are strong feelings and opinions sometimes sitting beneath carefully crafted words. In these areas of our collective action and being in the world, I sense we haven't reached unity, or there is ongoing uncertainty about roles, or some friends might feel strongly that existing ways of doing things wouldn't have occurred to me. I wonder whether some power dynamics are at play and we are not always speaking plainly about what is actually bothering us. Brené Brown, the famous researcher of shame, talks about rumbling with vulnerability. Are there difficult conversations we need to have with one another and as a society, but don't know how to begin? What are the stories we're telling ourselves about those other Quakers who were doing it wrong? Which shortcomings are we less comfortable confronting in ourselves? I appreciate advice and query number 5. Take time to learn about other people's experience of the light. Remember the importance of the Bible, the writings of friends, and all writings which reveal ways of God. As you learn from others, can you in turn give freely from what you have gained? While respecting the experiences and opinions of others, do not be afraid to say what you have found and what you value. Appreciate that doubt and questioning can also lead to spiritual growth and to a greater awareness of the light that is in all of us. Several years ago, I participated in Meeting for Learning. During the second retreat, I read Marjorie Post Abbott's book, To Be Broken and Tender, a Quaker theology for today. I was drawn to the phrase broken and tender because that's how I was feeling at the time, but quickly learnt that the meaning was in fact a little different. The words broken and tender are used to describe a community, a Quaker community specifically, that is thriving, nourishing, open, and connected. The broken part talks of breaking open our hearts enough to allow the light to shine in much the same way that Benjamin Blood had described it, or breaking the earth in order to allow a seed to grow. The tenderness is about tenderness to the spirit, or an openness to being led in unexpected directions. A broken and tender community contains people who have broken apart the bounds of the ego and experience pure love. It is ready and able to be tender in the care of its members and more passionate in its concern for the well-being of the world. What an apt intention for us. We are a bit broken in the sense that I originally understood the term, but we are offered the opportunity for that brokenness to allow for the light to shine in and fresh seeds to grow. We can either wallow in the brokenness or look to the light shining through the cracks. I was struck by the words of the Warona Collective in their report. They said, Kangaroo Valley is looking green, lush, and beautiful. The rains in recent months have renewed the vegetation which was devastated by the bushfires. Like the bushfire-ravaged lands in southern New South Wales, the ecology of our community has been ravaged and traumatised by recent events. Yet, we're already seeing signs of renewal, and long dormant seeds and shoots are given the opportunity to sprout and flourish, perhaps enabling greater diversity, richness, and a new home for some. Indeed, when I asked what is exciting about Quakers in Australia, one friend reflected that constant reinvention and re-relevance making is a Quaker requirement. Any group faces the challenges and opportunities of working to renew their potential and capacity. This excites me to see what arises as a Quaker corporate response to the changing essence of Australian society and the world. Another friend suggested that we might have a Jubilee year where we lay everything down except meeting for worship and the desire to know one another in the things eternal. Another said, we just need to live up to our leadings and we will always provide a home for many spiritual seekers. Friends, I was recently reminded of the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery. Kintsugi, meaning golden repair, is a process of mending the broken areas of a damaged bowl or cup with gold, silver, or platinum, thereby embracing the cracks and making them stronger and more beautiful. If we apply this principle to the state of our society, we can either sit around complaining about our broken bowl, of an aging population, too many roles, not enough people, or we can bring out our gold, silver, or platinum and make our cracks stronger and more beautiful. We have the opportunity to completely imagine our society anew. We have been able to trial and explore new technology that can bring us together and address the tyrannies of money, carbon emissions, and distance. Significant bequests have enabled us to be innovative and expansive in our pursuit of peace with justice. Our outward-facing stance on the social issues that I believe are most important at the current time, action on the climate emergency, and inclusion of gender diversity, have the potential to see us speak to those previously on the margins of faith communities, to create real change, and to enable our community to thrive once again. So friends, I put the question to all of you. How are we to break with the past and imagine our society anew, to paraphrase Arundhati Roy? How might we envision our truly broken and tender community as one that is thriving, nourishing, open, and connected? And how best might we hold it with love and ensure that the seeds will grow?
Thank you, Aletia. Thank you, friends. This brings to an end our first formal session of yearly meeting 22. Much has been offered. Let's have what has been offered. Enter us, stay with us, enliven us, challenge us. As we continue through this wonderful week. Go well, dear friends. We meet tomorrow for our first meeting for worship and start the process of